Sometimes the universe just sends you a prompt that forces you to just stop, take a moment, draw breath, and exhale deeply. You didn't even realize how much you needed it. Last week, I never shared a video. My mum spent some time in hospital, and although she is fine, it forced me to stop and just be more present, spend time with my family, and catch up on things I don't get around to enjoying often enough, like spending time reading, or in my garden or kitchen, and appreciating just the small moments. Besides, I didn't feel like painting, which sounds rather bizarre, but my headspace just couldn't lose myself there. There was too much else on my mind. And painting absorbs me fully. In the days of social media, it seems like professional artists arrive in their studio and paint up a storm day after day. They post posts of beautiful artworks which fill your feed. But the creative process doesn't work like that. It ebbs and it flows like the tides of the ocean, and allowing yourself to pull back, replenish the soul, and rest is what gives you the creative energy to come back strong and create again. I'm pretty strict, since art is my business, about having routine working times, but it's okay some days to do chores in the studio, like packing paintings, doing admin, replying to mails, or even clearing and cleaning out your space. Not every day has to be a painting or creative genius day. And so this is what led me to spending some time cleaning up in my studio lately, while resting and restoring my creative self too. This is what led me to also realizing that my inks were starting to dry out. Let me tell you a little bit about what I have discovered and how I solved it.
So I've been using my time in the studio this week to have a really good tidy up and just put things back in their place. Things seem to be lying all over the show. So and sometimes that's what happens when you've been creating and filming and working, and somehow everything seems to be lying all over. So I've been having a good clean, putting things back where they belong, finding things that I thought I'd lost. And one of the things that I realized was that a lot of my inks are starting to lose their caps. Now, these caps over time become pretty brittle. And what's happening is that a lot of my inks are starting to dry out a little bit in the pot. So I decided to have a good sort out of all of my inks. I also have a couple of inks where the lid is a screw-on lid, as in like this. Let me show you. It doesn't have a little dropper on the top, and I can't tell you how many of these I have knocked over. I also end up pouring a whole lot of the ink out when I need to use it, and I have some really beautiful colors in this brand of ink. So I decided to use my time this week while I'm having a bit of a spring clean to solve the problem of my inks before some of my inks where the caps are drying, before they dry out and I end up having to bin them. So I placed a little order on takealot.com. Takealot is a bit like our Amazon here in South Africa, and I have something in this box that I want to share with you, and I'm hoping it is going to solve my ink problems. And I'm hoping by the end of this week I'm going to have all my inks nice and sorted out and labeled and much easier to use. So let me show you what I'm going to do. Let me show you my tip for saving your inks if you have also got some inks that have got horrible lids, or the lids are starting to crack and break on them.
I really love it when an ink bottle has a little dropper top like this. I find them so handy. They're really useful for dropping out little bits of ink without wasting them. You can drop little drips of ink onto your palette or onto a little container for diluting. They're also great for making little marks into your drawing. You don't even have to use a brush. You can use a little dropper as a writing or mark making tool. I love these lids. So how did I solve the problem? I found a solution online that I hope is going to help me with my ink problem. Otherwise, all my inks are going to be dried out, and I'm soon going to realize that I don't have any inks left because it seems like a lot of the bottles are cracking and some of the inks are even starting to dry. So, do you want to see what I decided to do? I ordered this online. It literally came in a day. It took a day to get to me. And this is going to be my solution to my ink problem. In this little box, I have ordered in a whole lot of little dropper bottles like this, and I am going to take all of these inks that are now starting to dry out in these bottles because of all the broken and cracked lids, and I'm going to decant them into these bottles. It's got a lovely little dropper. I love it when inks have got a dropper like this. And I'm going to label the bottles, and hopefully I'm going to save a whole lot of inks from either drying out or landing up in the bin. Let me show you how I go about it. I start by placing one of my white ceramic painting palettes onto my drawing table. This is just so that if any of the ink spills, it lands on the painting palette rather than spilling and spreading all over my desk. I'm anticipating that this is going to be messy business. I get all the bottles out, ready, remove the lids, and pull out all the inks that I'm wanting to decant. Most of them are either in bottles like this, which I find really difficult to work with, or their lids are starting to crack and break open. So here goes, steady hands needed. So there you have it, first ink saved and in its new little pot. I think that this is an olive green that I started off with. I'll be sure to label them all so that I know exactly what will be in the new little bottles. Let's get started with the rest of them. Now, I anticipated that these ones were going to be a little bit harder to get into the bottle. It took me a moment to figure out how I was going to do this. I actually thought that they would squeeze in relatively easier than what they did. And of course, thank goodness for the ceramic plate underneath the ink, because of course I started to make a huge mess. But my mistake, because I suddenly realized that if I just stopped and had a look at the lid, I could actually unscrew the lid and pour it like I had poured the other bottles. I'm not quite sure why I didn't think of doing this right in the very beginning. It certainly would have saved the mess that I'd created on the palette so far. As soon as I'd figured out just how easy it was going to be to pour them into the bottles, it didn't take me long to get going with filling all the bottles with the ink. I actually didn't realize how many I needed. I made sure that as I was going along, I wrote a label for each ink that I had decanted. I made sure to include all the necessary information like the brand of the ink and what type of ink it was, for example, if it was acrylic, and of course what color it was too. So considering how many bottles of ink I have rescued, I'm pretty happy with how little ink I managed to spill. Thank goodness I figured out that I could undo that one bottle. It really helped with not spilling that much ink. So do put out something if you are going to decant your ink that can just catch the mess. And because I've done it on my ceramic palette, I'll use these colors in my sketchbook a little bit later. But do make sure that you label all of your inks correctly. These, for example, are both black inks, but one of them is an acrylic ink and one of them is an Indian ink. So I've been sure to label both of them correctly, because obviously being black ink, once they're in the bottles and lost their labels, I'm not going to be able to distinguish between which is which. So do make sure that you label your bottles correctly so that you know which inks are in which bottles and obviously which colors, because for example like this, they both look quite dark to look at. So one is a magenta and one is a golden ochre. I may even, when I use the colors, put a little dab of the color on the label just so I can see them at an easy glance without having to read them. I also wanted to say that I haven't necessarily decanted all of my inks. Although I do love using the dropper, I also love drawing with a dipping pen. And a dipping pen is so much easier to use when you can actually just take the pen and dip it into your pot of paint pot of ink. And I really love these little Winsor and Newton pots because they've got a fairly broad bottom base and they're not so tall. So the chances of me knocking them over, which I have done more times than I care to tell you about, they are quite sturdy. So I haven't decanted all of them because I love using my dipping pen, and this is way easier to be able to just dip your pen into the ink and draw with it. So not all of them have been decanted. I especially love using blues and blacks for my dipping pen. So some of these Winsor & Newton inks I have left in the little pots so that I can use them with dipping pens as well.
So now my inks are all nice and sorted, beautifully labeled, and they all have a lovely little dropper, which makes using them much easier to do. So really glad I got this tour done today. And I hope it's given you some ideas of how to sort out your inks or to store them, and a much easier way of using them as well. So see you here next week. If you've enjoyed joining me, please subscribe, like the video. It helps me to be able to share with lots more people.
Listen to your creative self. Take heed when the universe lets you know that you need to slow down. It's okay to not paint every day. There are so many creative things you can do around your home. Do the things that feed your soul when you know you need it, so that you can come back to your studio and your paintings with renewed energy.